Under the arms like this. We go pop switch. We go behind the back. Remember that we got a stretch in the morning. Very good. We're gonna go nice and high. Okay? Nice and high. Little spins, little spins. Double spin.
Fringe is unique,
powerful,
exciting,
an adventure.
I think it's people coming together.
It allows everybody and anybody to have a go.
Even some shows you'll come across and you'll be like, I did not even know there was a market for that show.
The arts have always been there, particularly theatre has always been there for me at the difficult times.
I always have that desire of being a performer, but you're deaf. How are you going to be able to do that?
How can you direct as a blind person?
I simply can't get into the venue.
I've got to look at it, almost assume that I can't get in.
Spontaneity is very difficult within the Fringe.
They had a disabled toilet that was down 2 flights of stairs.
The interpreter is normally put on one side of the stage. I feel like I'm watching a bit of a tennis match.
When I experience these barriers, it makes me feel sad.
Frustrated.
Uneasy.
Deflating.
But sadly not surprised.
Accessibility, it can become part of the artistic process.
It's trying to bridge the gap between the two different worlds, the hearing and the deaf worlds.
What would happen if there was a blind Hamlet or a King Lear who was deaf?
Talk to us, let us know what you already have, and we'll let you know what we need, and we can hopefully meet somewhere in the middle.
I'm Michelle, I'm a producer. I have limited mobility and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Leah, I'm a stand-up comedian, I'm deaf, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Alison, I'm a director, I'm blind, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Neil, I'm a musician, I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and it's my Fringe too.
Everyone
has the right
to experience
live performance.
Fringe stands for freedom. The freedom to take part, making a start, telling your story, whoever you are. It's for the risk takers, rule breakers, name makers, artists and audience alike, a place to discover and to be discovered. It's an international showcase, meeting place, creative space where anything goes and the world comes to find it. A global stage made in Scotland. An idea so nonsensical no one could explain it. Copy, own, predict or contain it. A complex design with human heart, ever-changing and state-of-the-art. The Fringe is groundbreaking, mischief-making, shaping conversations but never taking itself too seriously. Its birth was an act of defiance and it will never be shushed. It begins and ends with Edinburgh. It closes in taverns, venues in caverns, and waiting in line for a show. That feeling of belonging in a crowd of perfect strangers. The Fringe that calls Edinburgh home.
Hello and thank you for joining us today for today's FringeCast on Should You Do a Show at the Fringe? I guess this first things first, it's best to introduce ourselves. So I'm Alan, hi. I'm the registration manager here at the Fringe Society. I'm in charge of looking after registrations once that opens in January, but also these kind of events where we get to meet you, the artists.
Hi, my name is Katie Queen. I'm the Artist Development Manager, which means that I advise and assist artists on their creative and professional development goals in the run-up to, during and beyond the Fringe.
And hi, I'm Daniel Saunders and I'm the Digital Marketing Coordinator here at the Fringe Society, which day to day means I look after our social media, our email marketing and all kinds of other digital technical stuff, such as the tech behind these FringeCasts. So if something goes wrong, it's probably my fault.
Yeah. It never goes wrong.
Never,
it's fine.
Ever. Never been known. So Daniel, you're a tech man. How can people get involved today?
Good question indeed. So pop that slide on there. So FringeCasts are a little bit unusual. If you're listening to us live through YouTube, thanks for joining us. But you may be watching this back through YouTube later. But the best way to get in touch with us as we go live is through the live chat box on YouTube. So make sure you've opened up YouTube properly in your app if you're on a phone or a tablet, or full screen it in your browser. So hopefully you'll track down the live chat box. It's often sitting in the corner of the screen, and that's the best way you can send questions to us as we go, because this is live, it's unscripted, and we really want to hear from you and sort of answer your questions as we go.
Yeah, generally we're getting kind of old hats at this, and it always works best when people get involved and we hear from you, whether it's telling us from where you're joining us. It's always nice to be like, oh, I'm from Canada, I'm from Australia, we've got the whole world covered.
Yeah, and as Daniel said, these are unscripted sessions, so if we get prompts on what sections and areas you want us to cover, that will make it go a lot smoother and will give us a bit more direction. I mean, we know what we're doing, but we like to know what you want us to do as well.
Yeah, we always say FringeCasts are for the artists, so it should be led by you. So if there's things you want to know or questions you want, you have us here. We're a captive audience for you. Hopefully you're a captive audience for us. Just get involved.
And with those questions, particularly at this stage of the journey, there is no such thing as a stupid question. And we know with these sessions, there are so many times people have sort of sat on the sidelines not asking the question, and then we get 20 people emailing us the same question afterwards.
Yeah.
And if we know that during the session, we can answer that as we go.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this session is, should you do a show at the Fringe, we want to know what questions you're unsure about, what areas you might not be ready for or slightly in the dark on, so that we can kind of better inform whether you're ready to bring a show and whether the Fringe is ready for you.
And for this season, we have a shiny new email address to help you get in touch with us. So we also have FringeCast, all one word. Obviously, it's an email address at edfringe.com. So it's edfringe.com. And as Katie was saying, if there's specific topics that you want to hear about, things you'd like us to sort of be able to expand on, that's a really good place to let us know that.
And another change for 2020 is, following demand from last year, these live episodes are going to be edited a little bit and then available to download as a podcast in all your favourite podcast platforms. If you just search for FringeCast, you should hopefully be able to find it.
Katie's very excited about this.
I am. I love podcasts. I'm so excited to star in my very own.
But yeah, basically all that amounts to any questions that you do put into the live chat today. Daniel has his eyes beadily on them, so he can post them to the room.
And so far, no questions yet, but we have people tuning in from New York, Ireland and Toronto.
Oh, nice.
So if you haven't yet already, please do try out the live chat just to let us know where you're tuning in from today. Obviously, if you're watching this back later, we won't see it because it's in the past. We can't time travel yet.
Yet. We're working on it.
But yes, if it is that you're not watching it live, do make sure to send us those questions on fringecast@edfringe.com.
Great. Which takes us to
Today. Which I'll pop on screen just to help remind myself mostly. So try and cover a lot in the attempt to answer that question. Should you do a show at the Fringe?
That is a lot.
It's a lot. And we try and do these in under an hour, but we'll see how it goes. So we're going to start off with the absolute basics about who we are, the organisation we work for, and how the Fringe works and how it differs from other festivals. And then we'll start looking maybe at your show, looking at this, what your goals are, seeing how that fits in the scale of the Fringe, thinking about your budget, some of the challenges you may or may not be aware of when it comes to bringing a show to a Fringe, thinking about your show, is now the right time? Is your show ready to bring to the Fringe? Because in many cases it may not be the case, or it might be the perfect year for you. And then moving on to topics that you may not be thinking about at this stage, such as health and well-being, sustainability, accessibility, and finally wrapping up with all the different ways we are here to help.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's breezy. We can do this. It's going to be great.
Brilliant.
So shall we get stuck into doing all those things?
So, welcome to Should You Bring a Show to the Fringe? I guess the first thing I want to say is anyone can bring a show to the Fringe. Anyone with a story to tell who can find the venue to do it and can bring a show to the Fringe. The Edinburgh Fringe is not curated in any way. It's an open access festival, which means there's no one who's going to tell you can or can't come. But it also means it's very much artist-led a lot of the time. And that's sort of where we come in. So we're the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society. We are the charity that it sits in place to support the Fringe, to help artists, we run the box office. We also help market the Fringe to artists and then globally to audiences around the world. But fundamentally, we don't sit here in charge of the Fringe. We don't steer it in any way. We're there to support it and support the artists to help them get the most of it. And I think that's a really important point to consider when we're talking about should you bring a show to the Fringe, because it might be different from a lot of models that artists have worked with before, and kind of where your job comes in a bit, Katie.
Yeah, so essentially the kind of model that makes up the Fringe, it being open access, anyone can come, it being very much artist-led, means that a lot of people that do come to the Fringe are self-producing. They might not have a professional producer, they might not have a professional PR, they might be doing all of their marketing, audience development, logistics, planning, everything themselves. And so a lot of what we do is supporting those artists. Now, we support everyone that comes to the Fringe, regardless of whether you're self-producing, whether you have a professional producer or PR or general team around you. But generally, we find that a lot of people that need more assistance are those self-producing artists. So we have, as part of the registration fee that artists pay to be in the big Fringe book, but also on the app and the website. It doesn't just get you that listing on those platforms, but also gets you access to all of our teams. So the artist-facing teams, which includes the media advice service, it includes the artist development service, and it includes, a lot of pastoral care, help with your venues, and we'll be covering a lot of that in a while. But generally, it really does cover all of the areas that you might want to develop and might want to have extra help in while you're here.
I also think a really important point to establish when you're thinking of should you come to the Fringe is that taking into account what we've just said, we're not going to make any of those decisions for you.
Yeah.
You're not going to have someone who decides how much your tickets should be, writes your copy for you, does your marketing for you. Like, it's very much, you may have those places, you may decide to hire a publicist that gets involved with you, or you may have a deal with your venue where they have a sort of a lot of input into those decisions. But fundamentally, it's over to you, and you need to be ready to make those decisions.
And I think the point of the services that we provide are that they give artists the tools to be able to do all of these things themselves. So like, we give you templates for press releases and tour packs, and give you the tools and facilities to enable you to network with fellow artists, with the industry that are here looking to use it as a marketplace. So we won't do any of that for each show. There are, over 3,500 shows that are on the Fringe, and we're just a very small team. So giving artists the tools that can enable them to do that themselves is what we are most kind of led on.
And that's why we exist. If we go back and look at the history briefly, even though the Fringe started in 1947, the Fringe Society were created in 1958 by the artists to try and sort of coordinate it and make a little bit more sense of it. But even to this day, despite the extraordinary scale of the Fringe as a team, there's only about 30 of us, because we're not here to make those decisions or do that work, but instead show you where you could find that or how you could do it. And that's where these FringeCasts come in.
Yeah, and this FringeCast, I guess this one is a little bit unique. Normally, we would start our season with how to do the Fringe.
Yeah.
And something that we've all felt, and like feedback from artists as well, is that actually that's missing a stage, and that stage is deciding, because no one's going to tell you you can or can't come, that decision lies with you. So it very much is up to you to ask yourself those questions. So what we're looking to do in this session is to really almost give you little like nudges at different points of like, have you thought about this?
Yeah, I think setting expectations and giving people a better understanding of the realities of the Fringe landscape are really, really important at this stage, before people start looking for venues, before people start thinking about the logistics. So, going into the nitty-gritty of what kind of errors and mistakes people have made in the past, whether a show is ready for the Fringe, and actually one of the best outcomes from this FringeCast could be that somebody that might not be ready this year realizes that, comes to the Fringe to use it as a year for research, and brings a show at a better level, at a better standard, at better preparation for next year.
Which actually, Katie, smoothly transitions us.
Unscripted.
That was totally unintentional. But so the first topic that we've chosen to highlight, which is fundamentally, if you speak to any one of our team at any point in the year, they're probably going to take you back to this question, and it's about what are your goals? Why do you want to do the Fringe? What do you want to get out of it?
We should have some kind of flashback in time music at this point. What are your goals?
Yeah. Katie, I know you particularly, if you have a meeting with anyone, you're like, what do you want to get out of the Fringe?
Yeah, for sure, because there's such a huge range of goals that you can have in coming to the Fringe. And a lot of people come up here and say, I'm here for exposure. And that's great, but who are you here to expose yourself to? Is it that you're here to get audience and to get a better reputation amongst the general public for your show? Is it that you want exposure amongst the press or media? Is it that you want exposure amongst fringe venues so that next year you come back to a venue that's a bit different and has a bit of a different audience? Is it that you want exposure to the industry? Which areas of the industry do you want exposure to? And so really your goals should be very clearly defined before you even think about coming to the Fringe. And you know, there's a huge amount of thinking that goes into this, and generally being very specific in what that is, because you're not going to achieve everything. If you say that you want exposure in the media and also in the industry, you're really splitting your focus there, because both of those things can be quite difficult to achieve at the Fringe. You know, and if you have a really great team around you and you are really good at talking and good at networking, you might achieve both of those things, but you really need to narrow your focus and be clear on which groups you want to be speaking to.
I guess what you're saying there as well is it's not just about setting goals, it's about realistic goals.
Yeah, for sure.
It's actually about like, what do I want to achieve and what can I achieve?
Yeah.
And being really solid and sure of that at the start.
And especially if this is your first time at the Fringe, if you've never been before, if you're trying to achieve 5 or 6 of those things that Katie was saying, you're just biting off more than you could possibly chew.
I think so, and you're actually underselling yourself as well, because if you're trying to achieve 6 things, you're only giving a sixth of your attention to each of those areas, whereas if you're just trying to achieve one thing, you're giving your whole focus over to that. And you know, people that come to my team for advice on their professional goals, for example, we'll always kind of set their expectations as, you know, if it's your first year of the Fringe, you really might just achieve a very small amount of the goals that you set for yourself, and that's totally fine. I think giving yourself a 3-year window in which to develop a better sense of the Fringe is a really kind of, it's a more achievable length of time.
I think, so my background is I've done my own Fringe shows, and actually I think if I'm brutally honest, I probably kind of fell into that. I don't think I did proper goal setting at the start. I think I almost fell into, because I think what my goal was is no one at that point had put on my work as a playwright, and I was just like, I live in Edinburgh, I'm based here, I want to just get my work out there and for me to learn from it. So actually that meant just focusing on the show, which actually allowed us to kind of get a little bit more than that what we wanted, but actually being able to just go, do you know what, this is just it's mainly for us to see if there's anything in this work, if there's anything in us working together. Because I guess goals can be a company, and they could also be an individual who's coming up as part of a company. Yeah,
and sometimes actually you can just come and put a show on at the Fringe for fun.
Yeah.
You don't have to have any specific strategic goals, and it doesn't have to be, you know, very like it's put into boxes. It can just be for fun, and some people have it as a bucket list item. Some people, I spoke to a woman a few years ago whose family had bought her, had kind of paid for a slot at a venue for her because she had been, I think, writing poetry and doing spoken word events for a really long time, and she just wanted to do it at the Fringe, and they got it for her for Christmas. You know, it doesn't have to be your career-defining moment. It can just be for fun.
And most of the artists we talk to, their first experience performing at the Fringe is rarely doing a show on their own. It's often being part of another production or being part of a showcase or being
working in a venue, or, you know...
To get a sense of it, because the more you know, the better position you're in. You can set your goals more strategically. You can pick what you can actually achieve.
Definitely. And a lot of people in the past few years, I've noticed, have been coming up to Edinburgh as just audience members, literally just coming up here for a few days, getting to understand the landscape, getting to understand what venues might be the right fit for their show, and just seeing it and experiencing it in person, because it is unlike anything you've ever experienced in the world if you've not been here.
Totally. And I think it changes. We're going to go on to more about like research later, but also thinking about like the genre of work you do. So like the first time for a comedian may be different from the first time to a theatre show. And one of the things that it's going to come up later, but I want to say it now just so as it's in people's heads, is like talk to your peers.
Yes.
Like talk to people who've been there and done it, because trust me, as one of them, anyone who's done the Fringe loves to talk about it. Like
this will be a running theme for the next few Fringe casts, so buckle in. Alan likes to talk about his show. None of us saw it.
Because they didn't know me, not because they chose not to.
Or,
yeah, but like genuinely, like talk other artists and your peers are who you want to talk to get the realities of what it's like. Because as much as no individual experience is going to be the same, there's fundamentals that go through everyone of what it's like living in the city in August.
And you can try and reach out to those people at different steps of the journey. So you could find someone for whom 2019 was their first Fringe, and find someone for whom 2019 was their 5th or their 10th, because their experiences are going to be radically different. Because we're an impartial organisation, so we're not going to say how something is. So the key is to get as many different viewpoints as possible, because there is no one truth, there is no one idle way to go about doing the Fringe, and don't let anyone tell you that there is.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we do come back to time and time again, is that peer interaction and peer learning, and actually speaking to people that have done the Fringe before, even if you don't know them. I find that people that have done the Fringe, who've been on the ground and understood the kind of immense landscape of it, will always be willing to share their experience.
You want to pay
not
it back.
really there's not really a competitive kind of nature of being at the Fringe, because there's so much audience to go around, and there's so many shows to see that it's impossible to be competitive. So actually speaking to people that have done it before, they will totally share their knowledge, they'll totally share their mistakes and their ups and downs and their successes with you. And I think we do have artists that will be chiming into these Fringe casts over the next few months, that will be doing exactly that.
And it's worth saying that's actually quite a good point about competition that may set the Fringe apart from other festivals. Because in some cases at other festivals, people may go and see just one show, but at the Fringe, the average person sees about 7 shows. So everyone's not competing for that one person to go to that one show. People want to take in a variety of shows when they come to Edinburgh.
You guys have seamlessly done it again, because the next thing we wanted to talk about was scale.
We actually are serious that this is not
scripted.
We have some notes.
I was just watching Katie and I was like, has she planned this? This is good.
I didn't even read the notes.
So Katie, you were talking about like the sheer number of shows, the sheer scale of like the audience. I mean, even the fact that there's not many festivals that last a full month almost.
And it feels an awful lot longer than that.
But then it also feels a lot shorter sometimes. It just disappears.
Oh yeah, there's bits that it feels like it's never going to end, and then suddenly it's over, and you're like, where did that go? So I guess we wanted to include a discussion on the scale of the Fringe, not in a show-offy way. Ours is bigger than yours, or any kind of like scare tactics. But just like, I think one of the things that a lot of first-timers specifically might trip up on is not understanding the scale of what they're going to walk into.
Yeah.
Like maybe they've had really successful runs at like local festivals, or they've toured the show like around their area, and
or they've been to another Fringe.
Absolutely.
You know, there's so many.
Yeah, like the second biggest Fringe is still around 2,000 shows less than us, and that's a very rough estimate. But like that's just to show you the kind of the scale of Edinburgh. By the end of the Fringe last year, there were over 4,000 shows on edfringe.com.
Mad.
All of us are kind of looking at each other.
And that's different
over.
shows. So within that, in performances, there was in excess of 50,000, because it's fair to say the majority of shows perform for the full run, which again may be something that is different to other Fringes where people may do 3 or 4 dates. A lot of shows at the Fringe do the full 20 plus dates.
Yeah, and you know, some of them might only take a day or 2 off during the whole run. Some of them will also have preview dates outside of the official Fringe dates. Yeah. So, you know, you're doing 20 to 25 performances over every single night or day. And
the reason this slide is included on this topic is that it should factor into a lot of the decisions that you make about coming to the Fringe. Your work is, as much as we say it's not a competition, your show has to kind of live in the same world as like 3,500 other shows. And it's about being confident that you know its unique selling points, or you know everything about it. So is it you're sure of how it's going to work kind of before you throw it open kind of to the world?
Yeah, and I think it also would, at this stage, inform what work you're going to bring.
Yeah.
You said unique selling point just now, making sure that you're bringing something that is a little bit different, that will have, a wide audience appeal, but is a very specific topic. And, it's not just a mundane run-of-the-mill theatre piece that, a lot of people will have seen before. And if it is a piece that somebody, that a lot of people will have seen before, make sure there is something about it that sets it apart from other shows.
A lot of FringeCast down the line will talk specifically about marketing and being able to market that show you're selling. But it all comes down to understanding that kind of elevator pitch. Like, what are you bringing and why are you bringing? Straight back to goals, like, why are you bringing it? Because that's what people want to know constantly.
Yeah.
And when it comes to standing out from the other shows around you, while registration opens in January for 2020, we still have the shows up from the 2019 Fringe. And while every Fringe is unique, it's a really good starting point to get a feel for the kind of work that's brought to the Fringe, the kind of numbers of shows you're talking about in specific categories.
Yeah.
So if you go to tickets.edfringe.com until about January next year, all of the 2019 shows will be there for you to have a browse. And it's a really good starting point to get a sense of what you're up against.
Yeah, because it's a big thing of, like, it may change, like, decisions about what venue you choose. Because actually, I know our colleagues working with the venues really closely always say, if you've had you sell out your show back home in 150 seater, you're probably going to want to half that capacity when you come to the Fringe.
At least,
because like, lots of people start with like a sort of 50 seater max, because it kind of, they'd rather play a small busy room.
I think even 50-seater feels quite like a large scale.
When multiplied over all
venue.
those dates, that's a lot of seats.
And I think, if I was coming to the Fringe, I would not.
Just 2 chairs.
So many, 2 chairs.
Your mum and dad
can come
every
to
day.
every event. I think 20 to 40 is probably a good starting point. Again, it depends on your show, and it depends on what genre it is and which venue it is. And I think that's something that we'll definitely cover in future Fringe casts, of having those discussions with your venues and seeing what their general capacities tend to be and how well they sell as well.
So, sort of in summation there, we're just saying is understand that there is competition. There is a lot of shows out there. And or even like that also means, like, in terms of if one of your goals is to get a review or to get a member of the industry in, the number of shows versus the number of industry that can come, like, it's not one each. So you want to be really realistic about, like, what you're bringing, but also really sure, because if you're really confident of what you're bringing and you've answered all the right questions, then it helps you to sort of stand out as unique.
Yeah, for sure.
So moving on from scale to everyone's favourite topic, can you afford it?
Budgeting.
So budgeting your show, it goes without saying, it is very, very important.
Hugely. And again, I think it's another topic we'll be covering in more depth at a later point.
I think
so
it's
we won't
actually
go
getting
into
its own
detail.
Fringe cast.
Oh, very
like
fancy.
That's how big a topic it is.
Yeah, it's hugely important, and it's something that you should be thinking about before you even start approaching venues, because they will all have different financial deals that you should be thinking about. I'm not going to lie, bringing a show to the Fringe is a very, very expensive endeavour, and you should only do so if you're in a financial kind of stability that affords you to bring a show to the Fringe, to cover all of the costs associated with that, be it your venue hire, your accommodation, your travel if you're coming from afar, and if you're bringing a show, you hopefully would be paying fees to your artists. There's a huge amount of money involved in that.
And yeah, absolutely. And I also think depending on where you're coming from, those fees will only kind of go up. Like, I'm always very honest about the fact that my first Fringe show, I was able to afford that at that time because I'm lucky enough to be based in Edinburgh, so I could take accommodation off as something I would have to pay. But if you're coming from further afield, you need to, and I guess one of the reasons we want to talk about this is it's not just being like, oh, the Fringe is expensive. It's about asking people to be really realistic about like all of the costs that are going to come up. So it's not just being like, I think sometimes the obvious ones when you're first approaching it, you're like, okay, I have to pay my registration fee and I have to pay my venue. Everything else will kind of, maybe we could make it work. Whereas actually there's your accommodation, there's the living costs for the month when you're there.
It's expensive, and a lot of the time you'll be living in an accommodation that might not have the best cooking facilities, or you don't have time to cook. So you're thinking a lot about, you know, the cost of living in terms of making sure that you're eating, and making sure that it is quite expensive to eat out in Edinburgh during August. I think another important thing that people sometimes overlook is the income during August, is that if you've got a regular job back home that you have to leave for the month in order to come to Edinburgh, you don't have a regular income. Or if you are working as a freelance artist and you're thinking that you might be able to do some of that alongside your work in Edinburgh, you might not actually end up getting a lot of that done because there's not really the time or capacity to think about an outside job during the Fringe as well. The other thing is your box office income won't get to you until I think quite a late date after the Fringe. So being aware that you might not be able to reimburse a lot of the costs that you've expensed during Edinburgh until, I guess, late September, October.
Yeah, so the Fringe payout, so any tickets to the Fringe box office sales, that's paid out at the end of September, but then your venue may need that to go to them first, which would then mean it takes longer to get to you. But one thing, I'm actually really glad you brought up venues, because one of the things I want to talk about is the different models and how they can work for you. One of the things before you go into researching a venue, there are different models of hire for a venue. So you can have a straight hire, or maybe like something like a box office split with a guarantee. Yeah. And the reason I want to bring that up here is I found like when I did a straight hire, obviously that's a lot of money up front, but then on the other end, you know that then by the time the Fringe starts, you don't really have to worry
You've
so
already
much
spent
about other
that
things.
money.
You've already spent the money.
Yeah.
It's a predictable expense.
Whereas if it's a box office split, it's really dependent on how many people you get into that show every single day.
So it's weighing that up, because on that model, I wouldn't have needed to come up with quite so much money up front. It's a lot of times it's maybe more of like a deposit, but then you are having to pay more at the end, or you're not knowing. So it's about like if you're at all worried, it's about looking at those models and seeing which one works best for your situation.
And it all goes back to your goals point at the start about
completely.
If you're coming in and your number one objective is to make money.
Yeah, which, you know, I wouldn't say that should be anyone's number one objective, because it's very hard to do. But yeah, I agree that if your number one objective is to make money, you know, you should really be looking at the different deals. And if it is that you want to get 100% of your box office income, obviously a straight hire is probably one to go with. If you know that your show is going to sell really well and a box office deal looks more comfortable for you, absolutely do that. Don't forget that there's also the free Fringe models, where you don't have to pay for your venue, and it's oftentimes that these are in bar venues where they'll make an income off people coming into that venue anyway, and then your tickets for that show often tend to be free, but you can get donations at the end, and you know that can be quite lucrative for some people. And I think there's always a bit of a guilt involved. People always tend to put money into the hat at the end. So yeah, there's again, we will be discussing all of these in depth at a later session.
So we've got a question that's come in from Anne, who is already exploring.
Thank you, Anne. First
she's
question
exploring possible venues, and we will have a dedicated FringeCast on choosing a venue in addition to a specific episode on budgeting. But Anne is asking that she's exploring possible venues, and some are saying that they're already accepting proposals for 2020. Is that early?
No,
I would say that people would. It depends on the venue, of course. Some of them are programmed and curated venues, and they start looking at their programming probably during the Fringe previous. I think that people tend to start looking at programming properly from September, and so, venues do accept new shows all the way up until the Fringe registration deadline and beyond that. Oftentimes, Alan, you're probably better versed on deadlines and timelines here.
Yeah, I would say is a good tip. So, bang on what Katie said. Generally, there are people like I know venues who they've had a really good relationship with a company who've been there in August, and they say, look, we want to come back next year, and they're like, great, let's do the deal.
Yeah.
Or similarly, as Kate said, people who are ahead of the game and doing their research and are in and around meeting venues and seeing people during the Fringe. So that happens, but I do think that is sort of, that's small.
It's
like
very
don't
early.
feel bad that you've missed that kind of thing.
It's very, very early. And, registration doesn't open until January with the Fringe Society.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you have to have a venue contract in place before you register your show, but you can register your show all the way up until when?
So it's the middle of April kind of thing.
Okay,
This year it was the 10th of April. We'll be announcing the dates sort of next week
Great.
officially, but it's very close. I can safely say it's very well matched on this year. So like April 10th was the date this year, and you could get a venue contract on that day as long as it's before 5 o'clock, and you give yourself time to fill in the registration form. But it's worth saying that that's the only thing that we stipulate that you need to have in place is a venue contract.
I've got another question for you guys. It's coming from Don. If you don't know the answer, I have looked it up online. I'm going to test you.
Let's
first.
see. This is
So
exciting.
Don's asked, if we take 2019 as an example, how many shows come from America?
I'm going to say 50. It's a complete guess, but I'm going to say 50.
So I'm going to say, because there's an American High School Theatre Festival who do quite a lot of one-off performances.
Damn.
So I'm going to guess 112.
Okay, bearing in mind that Alan runs the whole
He does
registration,
run registration.
team, so he knows these figures more than I do.
It's worth adding as well that this is based on our registration. That's the country of origin is what someone...
Yeah.
There's a show that's allegedly from Antarctica. It definitely isn't, but it says it's ready for Antarctica.
Every year.
So of the 4,000 plus shows registered on tickets.edfringe.com at the end of the festival, 290
What?
said they came from the United States.
290.
So
Hopefully in America.
hopefully that's helpful and
Wow, fair play.
America and Australia are always
very
well
big. They're
represented.
the most,
Represented.
behind the United Kingdom, they're the most represented other countries off the top of my head. So we were talking about can you afford
Many
it?
things.
Many things, but can you afford it? But should we take an artist perspective on this?
Play the tape.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of context, Daniel and I met up with some artists in August during the Fringe to interview them on their Fringe experiences. So we're going to pepper our Fringe casts with artist knowledge from there. So this is us sitting down and talking with James Rowland.
I think I was very clear about how to sort of protect myself and make sure I had a nice time when I came up with my first show, which was I sort of made sure that I could afford to do it, which was, I was very lucky I'd got a job that year that I managed to save money from. And so it wouldn't, if it had gone all completely badly wrong, as it, or no, if nobody had come and seen it, which is what happened for the first 2.5 weeks of it, I wouldn't be in like financial dire straits. So like it wouldn't be like, obviously wouldn't have been good at all if people had continued not to come. I think in the end we almost broke even, yeah, I wouldn't have been like in trouble financially. I think that's really important.
Thank you, James. Sorry, that cuts off quite so abruptly.
I just saw my own face and that was terrifying.
So that cuts off quite so abruptly. That was me doing timestamps and got them maybe slightly wrong. It's worth noting, so James has brought shows for the last 4 years to the Fringe, solo work, and the one where he was particularly talking about there was his first show, which was Team Viking, which James was pretty much unheard of as an artist at that point, and had a run that ended very successfully with like selling out the end of the run, but had to work, as he was talking about there, really had to work to get that audience and word of mouth going. And I think what he was saying there is so important about actually he was able to cope with that really well because he'd worked out finances ahead of time, which is very easy to say, and James was the first throughout the interview to acknowledge the fact that he was lucky to have found himself in that position. But I think that's a really good, if you don't have to be worrying about money while you're already worrying about lots of other things. Like, if you can, like if you're trying to work out now whether you should do the Fringe and the sums are already giving you massive anxiety, then this should be like a warning, like a slow down. It doesn't mean a no, it just means you need to really seriously consider. You need to look at your fundraising. We're gonna have a FringeCast down the line that talks more specifically, like we said, around budgeting, but also around like fundraising, because genuinely that's a lot of stress to have on top of the stress of doing a show at the world's largest arts festival.
Yeah, I think money worries are universal,
Yeah.
even if you're not bringing a show to the Fringe.
Very true.
So, you know, everyone knows what it feels like to worry about money, and it's completely distracting and completely overwhelming. And if you're doing that while trying to put on your very, very best work in the world's largest arts market, it's not going to be a fun time for you. So being very prepared, being very realistic about whether you can afford it, you should start doing that at this point.
We can move us on to our next topic, but I think we've already, in this very unscripted nature, we've already covered most of the details of it, which is that question of, have you done your research? Have you really got an understanding of how the Fringe works and what other shows are here?
Yeah, and I guess we have covered a lot of the main points I want to say in this, because it's that one about, you may have an ideal version of what you want to happen at the Fringe, or you may be like, I want to be in this venue at that time slot. But is that realistic for you with the show you've got this year, with the people that know you, with the budget you have? And I think your research is about finding out what sacrifices or compromises you might need to make, and deciding whether or not those are compromises that you are happy to make.
Yeah, and whether those compromises will affect the product that you have in your mind that you want to display at the Fringe. With research, Daniel covered this quite well a while ago, is that the Fringe shows from last year are still on the website. So you can go on there. There's really, really clear filtering processes that you can go through to look at genres, look at subgenres, look at times of the day, areas of the city, geographical location. I'm sure there's plenty more that I'm not going to go in depth on. But seeing what shows are similar to your own show, finding, where they were programmed venue-wise, and finding whether they had reviews, what publications were reviewing them, if they're on tour now, where are they touring to, or who's producing their work, and being able to follow the trajectory of a company that was here this year, or 2018, 2017, looking at the past 5 years, looking at the patterns that are involved. Make a spreadsheet. Love a spreadsheet.
You need to love a spreadsheet.
You have to. You can obviously, if you're based in Edinburgh, you can come and pick up a physical copy of the Fringe programme from 2019. You can find PDFs of them all on the website still.
We've
on
got
Fringe.
last year's, and if you need any further back, just get in touch with us and we can send them over. Sure. And with any of this, we're impartial. But just asking us questions isn't limited to FringeCast. If there's anything about this you're not sure about, if you're saying, how would this fit, we can give you impartial advice.
Something, Katie, that we make fun of because I always steal from you. But I think something that's really important of what you were saying is, so you're talking about mapping kind of what another company did. And I think that's really good advice. But you say something really good about being realistic around who you're modelling.
Do you want me to say it, or are you going to say it?
I feel like you should say it, so as that a good stick for copying you.
So I think, and now I'm going to forget what advice I give to people because I've just been put on the spot. But looking at, people in the past 3 to 5 years is definitely more realistic than looking at somebody that, performed on the Fringe 10 to 15 years ago and is doing amazing work at the moment. Look at the likes of one example that we all know very well is Fleabag. Fleabag performed on the Fringe
2013?
2013. So, she's huge now, but that's quite a large trajectory to try to follow, and it's quite a significant leap from when she performed on the Fringe to where she is now. Looking at somebody that's more recently performed on the Fringe and is doing really great work, is, perhaps touring the UK or touring further afield, has got a really great, producing deal or agent deal out of it, is maybe looking at writing a great series for TV, but is still in a zone where they've performed on the Fringe recently enough that you can actually follow their trajectory more easily, and perhaps even get in touch with them and ask them, how they did it, who they spoke to, what they would recommend for somebody starting out.
Yeah. By the way, well done, Phoebe, if you're listening.
She is. She's definitely listening.
Katie, something that you always said that sticks to me is that you basically are trying to find the people who are where you were last year, like the position you're in.
Yeah. Sure.
So
something like that.
Who's at the place you are now last year. So they're like 1 year ahead rather than being like 5 years down the road and on the telly.
Yeah, definitely. And doing that peer-to-peer learning again, we'll come back to this time and time again, speaking to people who were there last year and who will be able to give you that recent advice that is fresh in their memories.
So time is marching on. I'm always the one to point at the clock. We've got a couple of questions before we jump onto our next topic. So the first one, from all of these really quick answers.
Okay.
So Don asks, can you do free shows? To which the answer is yes. And we'll go into more detail later. Roger asked, do we recommend contacting venues directly or producers or both? And if so, do we have a list of producers that we can point them to? Because he already says on our site, he's already found the venue listing. So we have that, but we also have producer information.
Producer listing, we have one from last year that is going to be updated in the next month or two. I can probably give you, if you get in touch and ask more about it, we can give you a little bit more detail. The list for 2020 will be updated around November time, so it's worth waiting to get a fresh list.
And I would say that there's nothing wrong with talking to a venue directly, though. Like if you're putting the feelers out, like, and it's just about being completely upfront and honest about what you're looking for and expecting.
And a question from Kate. It's a stats one, but you don't need to give a numerical answer. So how many solo shows versus company-based shows go up to the Fringe? How do successful solo shows make themselves stand out and get audiences in the door?
That is a hard one, ratio-wise. That's quite hard.
It's all about different genre.
Yeah, there is a lot of them. Like comedy, obviously, will probably be mostly one-person shows, though there are obviously a great number that aren't. I think it's about, though, like finding what your show is and what's it. So, for example, we've been hearing from James. I think what worked with his really well is he had a really unique way of storytelling and talking to the audience, and everything he did around that felt authentic. So like his marketing, how his copy, everything about that show, like how he introduced it. He talks about not speaking to the audience at the end of his show because he wanted them to keep the atmosphere of the show. So he spoke to them at the start and kind of did his sort of bucket speech, as it were, then. So I think I don't know what you think, Katie, but from my point of view, it's about that's what it's like, about not looking at other people and actually being about what you're doing.
And especially if it's a solo show, being very clear on what the message is and what that show is. And, you don't want 100 solo shows that are the exact same and you can jump from show to show to show and see the exact same product. You want it to stand out, and especially that can be it can be harder to sell to perhaps a non-theatre or non-comedy or non-performing arts going audience. But if you have a very unique way of selling it and a very unique story that you're telling through that, it can be hugely successful.
And when it comes to marketing, we'll have well down the road lots of episodes about the different ways you can approach marketing, whether you're a solo performer doing everything yourself or you're part of a bigger company. There are different ways you can go about it. We were talking about James, we were talking about research. We have a quick word from him about research and how we went about planning bringing a show to the Fringe. Shall we have a listen to him now?
Go ahead.
Roll with James.
Obviously it's going to be harder, but it is possible for that to be because of the resources that you guys have, and because lots of people are very happy and keen to talk through, like myself. Like if people ask advice about Edinburgh, in fact in the book of the shows that I published, one of the appendices I've put advice for Edinburgh, just because people asked about it. People asked like, how have you found it? And I was like, well, I'll just put it in the book and then it exists. And so I would definitely say if you're thinking about, or you are going to do Edinburgh for the first time, and you don't have an existing Edinburgh support network, start talking and asking questions now, like, because people will talk to you, and then you will be in a situation and listen, and then you'll be in a scenario when you don't where you don't have a nasty surprise.
Avoid nasty surprises.
Thank you, James. It's nice that he backed up completely what we were saying. So I guess this kind of leads us to a question that hopefully a lot of people are asking, like, is the show, is that kind of final stage? We've talked a lot about the sort of preparation, getting there and making those decisions, but also you have to fundamentally bring work that's ready.
Yeah, and again, it will come back to the goals thing. And, you know, if you're bringing the show to the Fringe for whatever goal it is that you're wanting to achieve, making sure that that show is the right fit for that audience. If you have a variety of shows that you can pick from, making sure that whatever you pick from is the most polished version it can be. The Fringe is obviously known for scratch performances and not being the most perfect and tour-ready work, but knowing that you can, like if I'm an international programmer that's coming to see your work, being able to see it in a capacity that I could very quickly pick that up and move it elsewhere. Just having all of these questions in your head when you're thinking about which work you're going to bring.
I think there's also something about remembering that, especially if you're doing the full run, you're going to be performing that piece sort of day in, day out. And that, like, we all obviously things like it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like, that is a lot of work. And the Fringe is also... you won't just be maybe like on a tour you're like just focusing on the show that night or whatever, and everything's up and running. Chances are you're like marketing, flyering during the day, networking and a party thing at night, and still doing your show. So it's really about being prepared for that balance and being like mentally ready for what's coming.
Yeah, hugely, and really, really building your resilience at this point, and again, speaking to people that have done it before and seeing what's worked best for them. You will get into the swing of things during the Fringe, and you will know who you should be speaking to and who you should be flyering, and when you should give up and go home, and you know how long you should be out there for, and you'll know kind of how to take care of yourself when you're going on stage, and if you're kind of feeling a bit rubbish one day, how to make yourself feel a bit better, and you know you get to that point where you know how you feel every day, and you kind of get to know yourself really, really well during the Fringe, I think.
And a great thing is the more work you put in advance, the more you're rewarded later. So by listening to this in October, that is preparation.
That's great.
You're already so far ahead of so many other people, and it just makes that time as we get nearer to August more straightforward. Because if you're leaving this all to the last minute, it becomes a lot more stressful.
And we don't want to in any way sound doom or gloom about it. Like, we clearly all love the Fringe. We work for it, but I think it's what Dan said, it's being ready. So if you know that, actually I do get quite nervous, I suffer from anxiety sometimes, that can be a lot, I get quite stressed if everything comes at once. Do what you can, like, talk to us, like, we're literally here to support you. Fringe Central, which you'll hear a lot more about as we go, which
My
is
baby.
kind of like a hub that is Katie's baby, where
a hub and a hug.
Where we look after participants really, and that's where a lot of opportunities are. Being able to use that and just let us know. So like, if you're sitting there and you're like, you've just raised so many questions and I don't know,
that's
actually
good.
Best thing to do, just get in touch with us and share those questions. We can get on the phone and be like, cool. And
it's better to have more questions now than to think that, oh God, I know everything. I'm ready to go to the Fringe. And bringing it back to that thing about if your show is ready, then prepare yourself. Because I don't think anything you can do will prepare you for the Fringe, and even if it's a show that's 100% polished, ready, packaged to go, also you might end up absolutely hating that show by week 2 and falling out of love with it and needing to take a step back and take a break and take a breather and then come back to a point where you love it again. So make sure it's a show that you really love performing, and you will continue to love to talk about even once you hate it ever so slightly.
And back to the start, remember why you're doing it in the first place.
Always.
So I guess our penultimate topic is one that many people don't think about at this stage, but we wanted to put it on your radar to start thinking about it, because actually a lot of the decisions you need to make to impact this, you need to make now.
So this is about social responsibility, which feels a bit buzzwordy saying it now, but actually it's because everyone realizes we have to care about things a lot more. So think about like the sustainability of your show and also the accessibility of your show, because those are things that Daniel's absolutely right in, that you need to put maybe more thought into than you would. The kinds that suddenly you realise 3 months in that, actually no, I really care about that.
Yeah, and it can be very simple, and there's a huge amount of guides on our websites for how to make your show more accessible, and another section on how to be more environmentally sustainable, and we're absolutely not bundling both of these huge topics would absolutely stand alone into one section, but bundling them into you should start thinking about being more responsible. You're coming to Edinburgh, you're performing here for about a month, you're going to be living in a city, and your footprint and your impact in this city absolutely matter. And having the population of Edinburgh
doubling
during the month of August from I think there's 6 or so festivals that take place here during August, with a huge amount of audiences, a huge amount of artists coming in. Being very careful and being very aware that you're in a city that is an ancient city, and you have a huge footprint by being here for a month.
And you as an artist have a tremendous power to kind of help shift and change the nature of the festivals. If we take sustainability as an example, from the most basic thing of how you get to the Fringe, how you promote your show, on that latter point, we're here to help advise in ways that aren't just paper-based. Particularly in 2020, that's not the go-to way of promoting your show. Absolutely. But all too often it's something people fall back on. And then accessibility, again, another area we're here to help and advise on. And it's one when you're thinking about venues, you can ask questions about it. One of the questions that came in from Anne was saying that she feels that a lot of the venues aren't accessible. And actually, it's something that is now in excess of 56% of Fringe venues have step-free access. There's a huge way to go, but you can still identify those venues that are accessible if that's something you value.
Also, if that's something you value and you want it improved, if venues are being asked that as a first point of call, like how accessible are you, it just lets them know that people do really care. But so do a lot of the venues. Like we do have Venue Access Award that a lot of venues are taking part in to become as accessible as they can possibly be in an ancient city. Why we're raising this now is like things like planning. So if you're doing your budget, is there room in that budget to like look into doing a BSL performance of your show, or a relaxed performance? Yeah, sustainability. Are you planning ahead to be like finding other companies where you can? I know companies that like shared vans to like get each other set and
and casting. At the end of the day, looking at this stuff now can only be positive, can only bring positive effects. If you're thinking of, your audiences, if you're offering a BSL or captioned show, or you're offering a relaxed performance, you are only going to increase your audience. Yeah. You're going to serve a completely different pocket of audience in Edinburgh that is crying out for shows that they want to see. And again, with environmental sustainability, if you're sharing a van with a variety of other companies that are coming up from, say, London, then you're going to reduce your budget because there's 4 of you sharing a van that's coming up. And there's loads of Facebook groups that you can start chatting to artists that are thinking about coming, and start thinking about ways that you can work together to do that.
Time, again, is our enemy, but for both these topics, we're going to have dedicated FringeCast episodes where we bring in different experts who could advise some of the different ways you could look at these topics and incorporate them into your show.
But basically, this is us just saying, make it part of your planning. Like, make it as important as writing the script. Cool. Okay. So that brings us around to like, finally, how can we help? Just in many, many ways. So many ways. I think one of the things we haven't talked about that we should is our website. If you're interested, if you go on edfringe.com, there's a section called Take Part, and within that there are many, many guides which can take you through the entirety of a journey from deciding to come through to like onward touring afterwards. So it's a really useful place to just like, there's lots of PDF guides that you can kind of like devour if you like lots of like reading, and that's the kind of research that you jazz with, then there's a lot of that. But then also the email addresses are said. So like FringeCast@edfringe.com is to let us know like how this session was, what we can do more going forward. But also participants@edfringe.com is a really good like first point of call. Yeah. For like almost any inquiry.
They know the answer to absolutely everything, and if they don't know the answer, they will signpost you in the direction of someone that will.
So today was answering the question, hopefully, should you do a show at the Fringe? But
creating
we have
more questions,
which is always our role. But looking ahead, we've got a number of other FringeCast episodes coming in the series.
These are the ones we've got planned coming up. So the next one is like how to get started. So if anyone's sitting today being like, you didn't actually tell us how to get started, we're like, no, because this one was about interrogating sort of that and figuring out what's right for you. The next one is much like in broad strokes, the practical things you have to go about getting started. And then we start to break things down into smaller topics. So finding a venue, what happens if you're coming as an international performer from overseas, how to budget your show, that kind of thing. And that sort of takes up to the end of 2019.
It'll be 2020 before you know it.
Oh no, please don't.
Yeah.
And for these future episodes, they are both streamed live on YouTube as we record them, and then we make them a podcast available to download later.
So if you subscribe, we've never got to do this before. If you subscribe to the podcast, then actually you will be kept informed every time we do a new topic, because they're adding in all the time.
You can rate, review, and subscribe.
Oh,
I've always wanted to do
that.
And additionally,
like Joe Sugg.
Addition to rating, reviewing, and subscribing, if you know other people who are planning to bring a show to the Fringe, whether they're in your performing company or just friends you have, please do pass these FringeCasts on to them, because we want them to reach as wide an audience as possible and hopefully be as helpful as possible.
Yeah, that's what they're there for. Like, all the things we raised today are, if people are asking themselves those questions now, so in October, they're not caught off guard come August, when there's lots of other things. So these are about helping you answer the questions, think about things that maybe you hadn't thought about before, and then kind of break it down. Hopefully we get more and more artists involved, and it's just a nice space for everyone.
Yeah, hopefully.
And finally, you can follow us on social media. We have 2 different accounts based on the work we do. So on Twitter and Instagram, you can follow us at @EdFringe, and that's the account we use to promote the Fringe as a whole. But we also have an account called @FringeCentral, again on Twitter and on Instagram, which is aimed at you, the Fringe artist, and it's our way of sharing the resources and guides and information about things such as FringeCasts to help you on that journey to Edinburgh. So it's more artist-focused than the general public.
Okay.
Amazing. I just want to say thank you to you both for joining me today. Thank you for everyone for listening along. And thank you to James for his insights. I'm sure he will be appearing sporadically through more of the sessions. I don't know if this is possible, Daniel, but we had one more James video lined up that might be just a nice way to end.
Sure.
Cool. So should we say bye?
Daniel
sure.
frantically finds the video that's not
Daniel's
lined
like,
up.
Alan, shut up.
That's properly unscripting it when you throw a clip that was never planned.
Okay, that's us
for today.
Yeah.
For today. Thank you.
And tune in next time where we'll be talking about how you can do a show at the Fringe.
Yep.
But from us, it's goodbye, and we'll hand over to James.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I think that's the other thing that, like, as I say, like, I in no way will claim that it is just because of what I have done, but I think as a combination of sort of being secure, like not being terrified about money and not being terrified about the fact that people weren't coming to see it, what I was able to do most of the time, like there were some hard days definitely, but most of the times was just trying to concentrate on making the show as good as possible for whoever was there, and I think that really helped because obviously people could tell that, and I think that people felt a real ownership of the show in a good way, like they felt like, because I'd been like trying to do my best for 3 or 4 people. I think people were like, oh well, I'm gonna tell lots of people about this because that was, I liked that he cared.